Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
Olá, estou muito feliz de estar.
Unfortunately, I don't speak Portuguese. Oh, wait, coming. Unfortunately, I don't speak Portuguese.
Infelizmente, eu não falo português.
But now I do.
Mas agora eu faço.
This is magic.
Isto é mágica.
I speak Portuguese because my phone speaks Portuguese.
Eu falo português porque o meu telefone fala português.
I am speaking to you in Portuguese, not my phone.
Eu estou falando com você em português, não é minha culpa.
Where is my mind now?
Onde está minha mente?
Is part of my mental abilities in this phone.
Faz parte das minhas habilidades mentais neste telefone.
If I say something stupid in Portuguese,
Se eu disser algo estúpido em português,
is this my fault or is it the fault of the phone?
é culpa minha ou é culpa do telefone? É culpa.
Okay, so we go on with the professional translators over there. But this is the problem we want to talk about. We have the extended mind thesis, which I will explain in a moment. It says that part of my mind can be inside a technological device, like this phone. And this is a mixture of multiple ideas, and some of these are very easy to refute. But it can also be restated so that it avoids most of the criticism that is commonly raised against it. And the extended mind thesis works well together with Bruno Latour's conception of collective agents, where you have humans and non-human parts and they together form an agent. And understanding the extended mind thesis in this way gives us insights into new problems of responsibility ascription to humans that form complex joint agent systems with machines, like me, together with a phone. So first, I will explain the extended mind thesis. This is a little technical, it's a little philosophical, so don't freak out if something is not entirely clear. Later, we come to easier things. The easier things are at the end, so that you are happy at the end, okay? So the thing is that we have this example of Otto, and Otto is somebody who suffers of Alzheimer's disease. He forgets things, and he carries a notebook around with him everywhere he goes. And when he learns something new, he writes it down, and when he needs some old information, he looks it up in the notebook. And now, Clark and Chalmers are those who proposed this extended mind thesis. They say, Otto decides to see an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. He consults the notebook, which says that the museum is on 53rd Street, so he walks to 53rd Street and goes into the museum. For Otto, his notebook plays the role usually played by a biological memory. So the notebook becomes part of Otto. Even more interesting is this game, you know the game, the blocks fall down and you have to put them into this row at the bottom. And there was research that showed that the physical rotation of a shape through 90 degrees takes 100 milliseconds to do. And then you need another 200 milliseconds to select the right buttons on the keyboard to do the rotation. To achieve the same result by mental rotation alone, to look at the shape and to try to imagine how it would fall, takes about 1,000 milliseconds, takes about a second. And so the physical rotation is much faster. And if you want to play this game, you use the physical rotation not just to position the shape so that it falls correctly, but to help determine whether the shape and the slot are compatible. It's faster to try it out by rotating the shape than by trying to think about it without rotating it. So rotating the shape is part of your cognitive process, where you try to decide how to drop the shape. And this kind of action, they call epistemic action. And epistemic action is alters the world so as to aid and augment cognitive processes such as recognition and search. Merely pragmatic actions, by contrast, alter the world because some physical change is desirable for its own sake. And then they conclude epistemic action demands spread of epistemic credit. If the program has done something good to you in an epistemic way, then it gets some credit for what it has done. If a part of the world functions in the same way as a cognitive process, then that part of the world is a cognitive process. And therefore, cognitive processes are not all in the head. This is what Clark and Chalmers say. This, of course, has been criticized, and we will see in a moment. If you read this carefully, this paper, they have actually 7 different versions of what they think is extended cognition. The first is to talk about systems that are causally coupled. In these cases, they say, the Tetris and the notebook, the human organism is linked with an external entity in a two-way interaction, creating a coupled system that can be seen as a cognitive system in its own right. So the machine and the human together are one cognitive system. Then they talk about epistemic actions. Epistemic actions alter the world so as to aid and augment cognitive processes, what we said already. The third is the use of external computing resources. Consider the use of pen and paper to perform long multiplication, the use of physical rearrangements of letter tiles to prompt word recall in Scrabble, and language, books, diagrams, and culture. So these are all instances of external computing resources, cognitive resources that are not in our head. Extended beliefs. What makes some information count as a belief is the role it plays, and there is no reason why the relevant role can be played only from inside the body. So when Otto has his notebook which says that a museum is on a particular street, then this is a belief. Otto believes that the museum is there. And he believes this belief, which is not located in his head, it's located in the notebook. Extended desires, for example, the waiter at my favorite restaurant might act as a repository of my beliefs about my favorite meals. This might be a case of an extended desire, they say. So you have outsourced your desire for a particular meal into the waiter. Or even extended mental states. Could my mental states be partly constituted by the states of other thinkers? In an unusually interdependent couple, it is entirely possible that one partner's beliefs will play the same sort of role for the other as the notebook plays for Otto. And finally, spread selves. Does the extended mind imply an extended self? It seems so. The information in Otto's notebook is a central part of his identity as a cognitive agent. Otto himself is best regarded as an extended system, a coupling of biological organism and external resources. So now the question is, how can we understand this, and does this make any sense? There are 3 criticisms mainly against this whole thing. The first is that the critics talk about the coupling constitution fallacy. They say a thermostat is coupled to the room temperature. But the temperature does not constitute the thermostat. In the same way, the notebook is coupled to Otto's cognition, but the notebook is not itself a cognitive process. So this would say that the coupling, Clark and Chalmers say, because there is this coupling, therefore this is a cognitive process. The critics say we can have a coupling without the coupled system being necessarily cognitive, just because it is causally coupled. This is the difficult part here. So if you don't like this, just relax for a moment until it's over. The mark of the cognitive is the second criticism, where they say there are particular features of mental states that make them cognitive states. And this specifically cognitive property is the possession of underived mental representations. Extended minds don't have any, so they are not minds. We don't even want to try to understand what this means at this point, okay? Leave it. We don't need this. I will show you in a moment that this is irrelevant. Cognitive equivalence is the third criticism. If a system acts as if it was a cognitive system, then it is a cognitive system. This is what Clark and Chalmers say. And of course, this you can also attack. This is a functionalist position. And in philosophy, there are many functionalisms of mind, and they can be attacked in various ways. So now if we look at this extended mind thesis more carefully, we see that there are actually three different claims. The first is the data claim. Storing data on devices that are located outside of an organism constitutes extended cognition. This is what the Otto example does. Right? You store data in the notebook. Then we have the causal claim. When parts of a cognitive process are causally connected to each other, then they constitute one cognitive system that can transcend the boundaries of the body. And then you have the computational claim. Performing integral parts of the computation of mental functions outside the brain creates a tightly coupled cognitive system that includes both parts from inside the body and from the environment. These parts cannot be conceptually separated without breaking the one integrated computational process. This is a little much to understand now, right? A long sentence. But the rest of the presentation explains the point number 3, so don't worry, it's coming. So we have these 3 different claims. And now, neither Clark and Chalmers in the original paper nor their critics ever identify this computational claim clearly. But it seems to me that this is the only proper understanding of the extended mind thesis. Now, what does this mean, the computational claim? We can certainly say that part of what constitutes cognition must be computation. Part of what we do in our brains is certainly computation. This is not to say that all cognition is computation, but that computation is one example of the things your mind can do. And now what is computation, right? If we say that a mental process is computation, we need to understand what a computation is. So there's a theory of computation, right? We know what computation is. We know what a function is from your second school mathematics. You know that a function is a one-to-one or many-to-one relation. Functions have arguments and they compute values. And you know what a computable function is. A computable function is one that can be computed. Not all functions are computable, right? There are functions that are not computable because, imagine you calculate the value of pi, right? It's endless, infinite. So you cannot compute it. But other functions are computable, and a function is computable if and only if there is an algorithm for finding a value of the function for any argument of the function. Now the next question, what is an algorithm? An algorithm is a kind of procedure. It's a way of getting something done. But not every procedure is an algorithm. An algorithm is an effective procedure, a surefire way of getting something done in a finite number of steps. If each step is followed exactly, success is guaranteed. This is what a computer program does, right? Each step of an algorithm is, moreover, easy in the sense that it requires no ingenuity or intelligence to carry it out. And thus, a mere mechanism can execute it, computer can execute it. And now to compute is to compute a function, and to compute a function is to execute an algorithm. And when a brain computes an addition, then the parts of the brain that are involved in the addition can be described as a machine performing a computation of the algorithm for the addition. You don't do anything different in your brain than what your calculator does when it does the same addition, right? And this leaves open the possibility that the brain at other times can act in ways that are not describable as computations. Your brain can do other things, fall in love or do other things that are not computations, but it certainly does compute also, right? And here you have the Turing machine. The Turing machine is a theoretical machine which has an endless tape, and there is a program which tells the machine what to do, and there is a read and write head which can write things onto the tape or read things from the tape. And it's like an old cassette recorder, right, where you have this head and it can read and write onto the tape. And what is important for us now is only the fact that there is a difference between the behavior of the Turing machine and the data on the tape, right? This is obvious. You have data on this tape, you have something written on the tape, but there is also the program that moves this head and writes things onto the tape. And this movement of the head is something different from the data on the tape, right? This is the distinction between the performance of an algorithm, is what the machine is doing, and the data on the tape is the information that the machine is storing. So the thing to see from this is a computation is distinct from both the algorithm itself, which is the program that is stored in the machine, and from the data required to perform it. But it is causally coupled to both, right? The computation is the effect of what the program does as a cause, and the data on the tape is itself the effect of the action of this computation. But the computation is something different. The moving of the machine is not the tape, and it is not the program. It is the activity. And so the extended mind thesis must limit itself to maintaining that it is the cognitive functions that are being outsourced to the environment. And now we see what is wrong with Otto, because Otto's beliefs are data, they are not functions. To know that the museum is on the 53rd Street is a piece of data. It is not an activity. And so Otto's notebook is not an example of externalized cognition. And therefore, you cannot criticize the extended mind thesis, correctly understood, with the example of Otto and say that Otto is not cognition. Yeah, it is not cognition. But this doesn't criticize the extended mind thesis. And the hot air surrounding the thermostat is not part of the thermostat either, right? It is causal to the thermostat's working, but it is not part of the computational process that goes on inside the little box. And so what counts for external cognition is the location of the performance of the cognitive algorithm. Where does the computation happen? It can happen inside your brain or it can happen outside of your brain. And this clarifies, first, why it is entirely irrelevant to the extended mind thesis whether Otto's notebook contains beliefs or not. And second, why Adams and Aizawa, the critics, are mistaken to attack the extended mind thesis on the basis of the thermostat example. Now it becomes more interesting. Now we are going to see how this computational coupling between an organism and its environment affects responsibility. So first we have to see how do we attribute epistemic credit just performing a computation outside of the boundaries of the body does not in itself constitute externalized cognition. You need more. If you hold a calculator in your hand, or I hold here my phone in my hand, what I did before, and I perform computations with it, even if these computations are part of some greater computation that is going on in my mind, it is still the calculator that calculates the results. It's not me. Just by holding the calculator in my hand, the calculator has not become part of my mind. Right? The calculator is not part of my own cognitive system, but remains external to myself. And this shows where the problem is. The problem is that the calculator's ability to calculate with numbers is vastly superior to my own, both in terms of speed and accuracy. And if I say that by using the calculator, I have integrated the calculator into my own cognitive toolset, I have immensely increased my cognitive abilities. Now I can suddenly calculate square roots of 7-digit numbers, or I can speak Portuguese, because my cognitive abilities rightly include the performance of the calculator. But this is wrong. Right? I can still speak no Portuguese, although this thing can. So the core problem of the extended mind thesis is really not about defining cognition, but about justly attributing the credit for the performance of a computation. And the problem of defining the boundaries of cognition turns out to be a moral problem and a problem of responsibility ascription. And therefore it's important for you, if you're lawyers, because you have to do with responsibility ascription. What is wrong with my claim that the calculator is part of my cognitive tool set is my attempt to evoke particular reactive attitudes as a consequence of that claim. Like praise or blame. I want you to praise me because I speak Cantonese with the help of this, right? And this is what makes it wrong, because I don't deserve the praise. So how does the attribution of the epistemic credit really work? Assume I'm calculating something complicated in my head, and I use a calculator to calculate parts of the long calculation. Now, the calculator's calculations are in themselves complete performances of an algorithm, and therefore it does not need to share the credit for these performances with me. My mental calculation, on the other hand, would not be complete without the calculator's contribution. My own algorithm cannot be performed successfully by me without the incorporation into my calculation of the calculator's results. So I rightly have to share the credit for my performance with the calculator. I cannot keep the credit. And the same happens with a tourist to Hong Kong, for example, who uses an electronic translator. He does not speak any Cantonese, but he can type English phrases into the machine, is what we just saw in Portuguese, right? And the translator will speak out the sentence in Cantonese. The user does not deserve praise for his excellent command of Cantonese. The performance of the algorithm that translates an English utterance into Cantonese has taken place entirely inside the translator, and only the machine or its designer deserves credit for it, or blame if the translation is wrong. But in principle, there are cases where the credit for the performance of an algorithm can be justly shared. If two processors execute parts of the same algorithm, and neither can complete successfully without the other, then the credit must be attributed to the set of processors which jointly execute the algorithm. So, for example, I want to persuade a Cantonese bus driver to stop the minibus near my home and let me get off the bus. A particular sequence of utterances in Cantonese is required to bring about this result. I need to tell him to stop and open the door and let me out. But there are two parts to this algorithm: the persuasion strategy, when do I say these things in what sequence to the driver, and second, the translation. And they both depend on each other. This might be argued to be genuinely one extended cognitive process, because neither part can successfully complete the task of getting me off the bus at the right place without the other. The credit for the success of this is to be shared among the processors involved, me and the translator machine. Now this reminds one of Bruno Latour, whom you probably know, because he also talks of hybrid agents, of compound agents. And we will call a hybrid agent a computational aggregate that is composed of internal and external parts which jointly achieve cognitive results that lead them to act in a particular way as agents. And the thing to see is that hybrid agents are not multiple cooperating agents. Their components fuse into one agent. And we will see in a moment how this happens. Latour says the use of an artifact by an agent changes the behavior of both the agent and the artifact. And this is against what we normally think. We think the agent uses the artifact, but it's not true. Not only the gun is operating according to the wishes of the user of the gun, but it is in equal measure the gun that forces the user to behave as a gun user, forces him to assume the right posture for firing the gun, for example, forces him to stop moving while firing, forces him to aim using the aiming mechanism of the gun. Even more importantly, having a gun at his disposal will change the user's goals as well as the methods he considers in order to achieve these goals. To avoid a danger or to confront a danger. If I have a gun, then I'm not afraid. I'm going to confront a situation which normally perhaps I would avoid if I didn't have a gun. So the composite agent, who is composed of myself and the gun, is a different agent with different goals and methods at his disposal than the original agent, me without the gun, had been. And when we want to use a gun, we have to be trained to use a gun. When we want to use any machine, we have to be trained to use the machine. The goal of the training process in using an artifact is two things. First, to make the human able to accurately predict the behavior of the hybrid system that he himself and the artifact constitute. And thus, to integrate the artifact rationally into a plan of action that the user has decided upon and is about to carry out. The second aspect is crucial for the responsibility ascription for the consequences of the actions of the hybrid agent. Assume, for example, a user considers using an artifact as part of a rational plan using his car to drive to work. The car behaves correctly, but the user's mishandling of the car causes an accident. Then you would say that the user is responsible and liable for the damages. But if the engine of the car unpredictably catches fire while on the highway, then the user will not be responsible, but perhaps we would blame the car's designer or the engineer instead. The training to drive the car, part of the driving license, increases the user's expected ability to accurately predict the hybrid agent's actions and to align them with his own intended outcomes. And now come the problems. This is how it should work. But there is a problem, which is the following. When you supervise a child or a dog, then you find this easy. You can bring your dog out every evening for a walk, and you don't have problem supervising it. Why? Because my ability to understand the likely outcomes of my actions and to predict the behavior of the world around me is more developed than that of the child or the dog, which I'm supervising. So I have an epistemic advantage, and the epistemic advantage I have over the supervised agent makes me a suitable supervisor. I have a greater degree of control over the interactions of the supervised agent with his environment than he would have if left to his own devices. By knowing more than the child, I am in a position to foresee harm, both to the child and to the environment, and thus to avert it. This higher degree of control bestows on me a higher responsibility. Commonly, parents as well as dog owners are held responsible for the actions of their children and pets, as long as they have been supervising them at the moment the action occurred. Now, the problem is that in computational hybrids of humans with non-humans, it is often the human part who is at an epistemic disadvantage. At the same time, it is the human whom we traditionally single out as the bearer of responsibility for the actions of the hybrid system. Supervising a nuclear power plant, as opposed to supervising a dog, I have to rely on artificial sensors, radioactivity, high temperatures, high pressures, without which I am unable to receive crucial information. Without artificial sensors and artificial computational devices, I am not able to control the nuclear power plant at all. I and the control devices of the power plant constitute a hybrid agent. Control of the power plant is obtained through the execution of an algorithm, but this algorithm cannot be executed by the human brain and its sensors alone. Additional sensors are necessary, and also part of the algorithm that controls the power plant, part of the computations needed to adjust these sensors and to adjust the pressures, is necessarily executed outside of the human body. And therefore, no human can be said to be effectively controlling the power plant. The human, together with the computers and sensors and switches, is in control. The hybrid agent is in control, but not the human alone. And this phenomenon is common with all kinds of technical devices. I was just told that I have to finish, so I will try to, shorten it a little. A common misconception when talking about hybrid agents is that you say humans should exercise better control over the actions of the non-human part, supervise it more effectively, so that negative consequences of the operation of the hybrid entity can be seen in advance and can be averted. But responsibility for a process and its consequences can only be ascribed to someone who is in effective control of that process. Ascribing responsibility to agents who are in a position of epistemic disadvantage is not just and poses problems of justification. Now, there is a second part to this argument, which is here, the human in the loop fallacy. I will cut this out now because you say we don't have time. Go to the conclusion. You know that there is a printout which you probably got, so if you want the second half of the argument, you can read it in the printout. The conclusion is now, the extended mind thesis shows us how the components of a hybrid agent can jointly execute one single algorithm. In this case, it is impossible to ascribe credit or blame for the result to any particular subsystem of the joint agent. Latour reminds us that using an artifact is not a one-way action, but an interaction, a back and forth between agent and artifact, in which both have to change and to adapt, forming a new compound agent. Humans, as part of hybrid agents, cannot effectively control the agent for two reasons: because of the epistemic disadvantage and the limited access to sensory data and to computational resources. The second reason we didn't talk about, but you can read about it in your printout, because of the lack of an incentive to dispute the machine's decisions, the man-in-the-loop fallacy. Classic models of responsibility ascription operate under the mistaken assumption that there are agents and, separately, objects of agency, things that the agents make use of in executing their agency. This is wrong when you talk about hybrid agents, where the cognitive algorithm is executed in part outside of the human component's body, that is, by the artifact. In these cases, the agent and the extended components form a computational hybrid, which cannot be any more separated into distinct parts for the purposes of responsibility ascription. A joint agent is one unit, one indivisible whole, and responsibility for his actions diffuses across the whole of it. And this is the end. Thank you. You also find some more